Some people believe that silence is a sign of weakness. They think that if you do not fight back immediately, if you do not scream, or if you do not cry out in anger, it means you have accepted defeat. For 3 long years, a man named Julian thought exactly that about me. He looked at my quiet nature, my patience, and my willingness to keep the peace, and he mistook it for submission. He truly believed I would stay quiet forever, no matter how terribly he treated me, no matter how much he stole from my life, and no matter how deeply he betrayed my trust. But what Julian failed to understand is that silence is not always a white flag of surrender. Sometimes, silence is simply the quiet before a massive, devastating storm. My name is Arthur, and for a long time, I lived a relatively simple life. I am a graphic designer and digital architect. I am the kind of person who prefers sitting behind a computer screen, creating beautiful things, rather than standing in the spotlight. I never liked conflict. If someone cut me off in traffic, I would let it go. If a restaurant got my food order wrong, I would eat it anyway just to avoid causing a scene. I always believed that peace of mind was more valuable than winning a petty argument. People around me used to say I was too kind for my own good. My mother always warned me, "Arthur, the world is full of people who will mistake your gentle heart for a doormat. Be careful who you let into your circle." I should have listened to her. But then came Julian. Julian was everything I was not. He was loud, charismatic, highly confident, and possessed a unique ability to charm anyone in a room within 5 minutes of meeting them. He had a brilliant smile and a way of speaking that made you feel like you were the most important person in the world, until he no longer needed you. We met at a local business mixer. I was sitting in the corner, holding a glass of water, feeling completely out of place among the crowd of ambitious entrepreneurs. Julian noticed me, walked over with an effortless grin, and struck up a conversation. "You look like the smartest guy in this room, and also the most bored," he said, laughing. Within an hour, he had convinced me to talk about my passion projects. I told him about a software and branding concept I had been developing for years, a unique digital platform designed to help local, independent creators protect their intellectual property and sell their work without being eaten alive by massive corporate fees. I called it the Safe Haven Project. It was my life's work. I had spent countless late nights coding, designing, and building the infrastructure from scratch. Julian's eyes lit up as I spoke. He didn't just listen. He validated every single idea I had. He told me I was a genius. He told me that the world needed this platform, but more importantly, he told me that I needed a partner like him to bring it to life. "Arthur, you are the brains, the creative soul," Julian said, leaning in closer, his voice filled with apparent sincerity. "But you need a voice. You need someone who can pitch this to investors, someone who can handle the ugly business side while you focus on what you love. Let's do this together. A 50-50 partnership. We will build an empire, and we will do it as brothers." I wanted to believe him so badly. For years, I had been told that my ideas were great, but that I lacked the aggressive personality required to succeed in the business world. Here was a man offering to be that aggressive force for me, while promising to protect my interests. Felt like a dream come true. We shook hands that night, and within 2 weeks, we officially launched our joint venture. In the beginning, everything seemed perfect. Julian worked tirelessly to secure meetings with local investors, while I spent 18 hours a day refining the platform, fixing bugs, and ensuring the user interface was flawless. We rented a small office space, lived on cheap coffee, and shared the excitement of building something from the ground up. Julian was a master storyteller. He could sell ice to an iceberg. Every time we had a meeting, I watched in awe as he captivated audiences with the vision I had created. But looking back, the warning signs were always there. I was just too blind, or perhaps too trusting, to see them. Julian began making decisions without consulting me. He would change small design elements or alter contract terms, brushing it off as quick business decisions whenever I brought it up. "Don't worry about the details, Artie," he would say, using a patronizing nickname I disliked but tolerated. "I'm just saving you the headache. You focus on the code. Leave the boring stuff to me." I trusted him. I let it slide because the project was moving forward, and I wanted to maintain harmony. I thought our friendship and our shared dream were strong enough to withstand minor communication issues. I convinced myself that partnerships required sacrifice and that I needed to trust his business instincts just as he trusted my technical expertise. But Julian wasn't just managing the business side. He was quietly building a stage where he would play the hero, and I would be completely erased from the script. He was preparing the ultimate betrayal, completely confident that even if I found out, my quiet, non-confrontational nature would prevent me from ever fighting back. He truly believed I would stay quiet. He had no idea how wrong he was. As the months rolled by, the Safe Haven project began to gain serious traction. Local blogs started writing about us, and we were receiving hundreds of sign-ups every single day from independent artists, writers, and designers. The platform was working exactly as I had intended. It was empowering people, protecting them from exploitation, and creating a genuine community. Seeing the positive feedback from real users was the most rewarding experience of my life. It made all the sleepless nights, the skipped meals, and the intense stress completely worth it. However, as the platform's success grew, Julian's behavior began to shift in a very unsettling way. The friendly, collaborative partner I thought I knew started disappearing, replaced by someone increasingly arrogant, dismissive, and distant. Whenever a journalist reached out for an interview, Julian would handle it alone. At first, he claimed it was because I was too busy coding, and that he didn't want to waste my valuable time with media fluff. But then I started reading the published articles. My name was barely mentioned. In one prominent local tech magazine, the article described Julian as the sole visionary and mastermind behind Safe Haven, while I was relegated to a single sentence at the very bottom. Julian is assisted by a local developer, Arthur, who handles the technical maintenance. My heart sank when I read those words. A local developer who handles maintenance? I was the creator. I had written every single line of code. I had designed every pixel of the interface. The entire conceptual framework belonged to me. I marched into Julian's office that morning. The magazine crumpled in my hand. I felt a rare spark of anger igniting in my chest. "Julian, what is this?" I asked, throwing the magazine onto his desk. "Why am I being described as an assistant? We are 50-50 partners. This platform was my idea." Julian didn't even look up from his phone immediately. When he finally did, he offered a casual, dismissive chuckle. "Oh, come on, Artie. You know how these journalists are. They love a single founder narrative. It makes for a cleaner story. It's better for the brand if the public sees one strong leader. It builds investor confidence." "But it's a lie," I insisted, my voice trembling slightly. "It's not just about ego, Julian. It's about credit. It's about the truth of who built this." Julian stood up, walked around his desk, and placed a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder. His voice transitioned into that warm, persuasive tone he used so effectively on investors. "Look, I get it. Your feelings are hurt. But you need to look at the bigger picture. We are on the verge of securing a $2 million investment from the Vanguard Group. If we start arguing in public or changing the narrative now, it looks unstable. It looks like internal drama. Do you want to jeopardize a $2 million deal over a magazine typo? Let's get the funding first. Once the money is in the bank, I'll personally make sure you get a massive public profile boost. Trust me, brother. Have I ever let you down?" I looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deceit. He looked completely sincere. The mention of the Vanguard Group investment also silenced me. $2 million would allow us to take the platform global. It would mean financial security for my family and the realization of my ultimate dream. Once again, my desire for peace and my fear of ruining a massive opportunity caused me to step back. I nodded slowly, swallowed my pride, and went back to my desk. "All right," I said quietly, "for the sake of the deal." "That's my boy," Julian smiled, turning back to his phone. That was the moment I opened the door for him to completely destroy me. By showing him that I would accept his excuses, I signaled to him that I was a safe target. Over the next few weeks, The cracks in our foundation widened into canyons. I noticed that Julian began locking his computer whenever I walked past his desk. He started taking business calls in the hallway, speaking in hushed tones. Whenever I asked about the progress of the Vanguard Group contract, he would give vague answers. "It's with the lawyers, Artie. Lots of red tape. Don't worry about it. I'm handling it." Then came the day of the final signing. Julian told me the meeting with Vanguard was just a formality, a quick legal checkup that only required his presence as the managing partner. He told me to stay at the office to ensure the servers didn't crash during a scheduled system update. I agreed, completely unaware that while I was monitoring server traffic, Julian was signing a document that would completely rewrite my future. That evening, Julian didn't come back to the office. He didn't answer my calls or text messages. I figured he was out celebrating with the investors and that we would talk the next morning. When I arrived at the office the following day, I found two large, muscular men standing outside our suite. They wore dark suits and earpieces. As I approached the door, one of them stepped forward, placing a firm hand on my chest. "Can I help you?" the security guard asked coldly. Yes, I work here," I said, confused.
"I'm Arthur,
the co-founder." The guard checked a clipboard. "Your name is not on the authorized entry list. You need to leave the premises immediately." Before I could even process what was happening, the office door opened and Julian walked out. He wasn't wearing his usual casual business attire. He was wearing a custom-tailored, expensive suit. He looked at me, not with the warmth of a partner, but with the cold, detached gaze of a total stranger. "Julian," I called out, relieved to see him. "Tell these guys who I am. They won't let me in." Julian took a slow breath, adjusting his cuffs. "They are doing exactly what they are paid to do, Arthur. You don't work here anymore." The world around me seemed to tilt. The ambient noise of the hallway faded into a dull, distant ringing. I looked at Julian, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for him to tell me this was a bizarre, elaborate practical joke to celebrate our new investment. But his face remained completely emotionless. What are you talking about, Julian?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean I don't work here? I built this place. We built this together." Julian stepped closer, signaling the security guards to stand down for a moment. He spoke in a low, quiet voice, entirely devoid of the warmth he had used to manipulate me for months. "Let's be realistic, Arthur. You wrote some code. That's it. Anyone can write code. I can hire 10 developers from overseas for a fraction of what a 50% partnership is worth. I am the one who secured the Vanguard investment. I am the face of Safe Haven. The investors didn't invest in your code. They invested in me. We have a contract," I said, my anger finally breaking through the shock. My voice echoed down the hallway. "We signed a partnership agreement. 50-50. You can't just kick me out." Julian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper, handing it to me. "I suggest you read the fine print of the intellectual property transfer agreement you signed 6 months ago, Arthur. Remember when we applied for that small business loan and you signed a stack of legal documents without reading them because you were too busy fixing a server error?" My blood ran cold. I remembered that day vividly. Julian had rushed into my workspace, panicked, claiming we needed an immediate signature to secure a short-term line of credit to keep the lights on. I had trusted him implicitly. I had signed where he told me to sign, barely glancing at the dense legal jargon. "You lied to me," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "You tricked me into signing over my rights." "I protected my business," Julian corrected coldly. "The Vanguard Group required a clean corporate structure with a single, clear owner. You were a liability, Arthur. You don't have the stomach for this industry. You're too soft. You want to save the world. I want to build a unicorn company. We were never aligned." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small envelope, tossing it at my feet. It landed with a soft thud on the carpet. "There is a check for $10,000 in there," Julian said, turning his back to me. Consider it a severance package and payment for your technical services over the past year. If you try to sue, or if you make a scene, my legal team will tie you up in court for the next 10 years until you are completely bankrupt. Take the money, Arthur. Walk away. Keep your mouth shut and move on with your life. You're a good developer. Go find a nice, quiet job where you don't have to worry about big decisions. With those words, Julian walked back into the office, and the heavy glass door clicked shut behind him. The security guards stepped forward, blocking my view, their expressions completely unyielding. "Time to leave, sir," one of them said. I stood there for what felt like an eternity. I looked down at the envelope on the floor containing $10,000. A pathetic, insulting fraction of the millions my platform was now worth. I felt a wave of humiliation so intense it made me physically sick. Passers-by in the hallway were staring at me. I was the co-founder, the creator, the soul of the company, and I was being thrown out like trash. I didn't pick up the envelope. I turned around, walked down the long hallway, entered the elevator, and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. My mind was completely numb. I walked for hours without a destination, the sounds of the city fading into the background. When I finally reached my apartment, I sat down in the dark. The silence of the room wrapped around me, heavier than it had ever been before. I felt a profound sense of grief, not just for the loss of my company, but for the utter destruction of my trust. I had treated Julian like a brother. I had shared my dreams, my fears, and my hard work with him, and he had used my trust as a weapon to completely evict me from my own life. The next few days were a blur of deep depression. I called several corporate lawyers, hoping for a glimmer of hope, but as soon as they reviewed the documents Julian's team had filed, their expressions turned grim. "He set this up perfectly, Arthur," one veteran lawyer told me, sighing heavily as he laid out the paperwork. "Legally speaking, you voluntarily transferred all intellectual property rights to the corporation, and as the sole managing director, Julian had the legal authority to terminate your employment. Fighting this in court would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and given the phrasing of these clauses, your chances of winning are incredibly slim. I'm sorry. He played you. Everyone told me the same thing. Move on. Let it go. You can't win against someone with that much backing. Stay quiet." Julian thought I would follow that advice. He knew my history. He knew I hated conflict. He expected me to lick my wounds, accept my defeat, and disappear into obscurity. For a few weeks, I almost did. But every time I opened the internet and saw Julian's face on news sites, celebrating his brilliant creation, something inside me began to change. The sadness and humiliation began to harden into something solid, sharp, and focused. I realized that playing by Julian's rules in a corrupt legal system would never bring me justice. If I wanted to expose the truth, I had to change the game entirely. I had to stop being the quiet victim. Julian thought my silence meant I was defeated. He had no idea I was just changing my strategy. True revenge is not about anger. It is about precision. If you strike back out of pure emotion, you make mistakes. You leave trails, you break laws, and you allow your enemy to play the victim. I knew that if I wanted to bring Julian down, I had to be completely meticulous. I had to use the one thing he couldn't control, my intimate knowledge of the very platform he had stolen from me. Julian believed he owned the Safe Haven project, but he only owned the legal entity. He didn't understand the machinery. He didn't know the code. He couldn't navigate the back-end architecture without assistance. To him, the platform was just a cash cow, a beautiful box that generated wealth. To me, it was a living system that I had designed from scratch. And when I built that system, I had unknowingly left myself a key. When I first created the foundation of Safe Haven, I was obsessed with data security and system recovery. I had implemented a deeply embedded, completely private administrative protocol, a digital backdoor, designed to allow me to restore the system in the event of a catastrophic server failure or an external cyber attack. It was an entry point that didn't appear on any standard developer logs, completely hidden within the core infrastructure. Julian's high-priced corporate developers would never find it because they didn't even know what to look for. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by 3 monitors, the glow of the screens illuminating my face in the dark. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel sadness. I felt an intense, icy clarity. I began to write a comprehensive blueprint for my response. My goal was not to destroy Safe Haven. I still cared about the independent creators who relied on the platform to survive. Destroying the system would hurt thousands of innocent users, and that would make me no better than Julian. No, my goal was to completely isolate Julian, to strip away his mask of respectability, and to force him to face the public eye as the fraud he truly was. To accomplish this, I needed undeniable, absolute proof of his deception. I needed to show the world exactly how he had manipulated me, how he had misled investors, and how he was planning to exploit the very users he claimed to protect. Through my hidden digital access, I quietly entered the company's internal communications network. I didn't alter any data. I didn't sabotage any files. I simply watched and listened. Over the course of 4 weeks, I downloaded thousands of internal emails, private chat logs, and financial documents. What I discovered was far worse than I had ever imagined. Julian wasn't just a thief, he was a predator. In the private email threads between Julian and the lead representatives of the Vanguard Group, I found the true reason behind my sudden eviction. The Vanguard Group had never requested a single owner structure. That was a complete lie invented by Julian. In reality, Julian had negotiated a secret side deal. The Vanguard Group was planning to acquire Safe Haven completely within 2 years, phase out the independent creator protection protocols, and transform the platform into a high-fee data monetization service. Julian was planning to sell out the very community we had built. In one email, a Vanguard representative asked, "Will the co-founder, Arthur, be an issue when we transition the platform away from the creator protection model?" His public statements indicate he is highly committed to ethical data practices. Julian's reply made my stomach turn. "Don't worry about Arthur. He is a weak, quiet guy who does what he's told. I am currently arranging his exit. He will sign whatever I put in front of him and disappear without a peep. He doesn't have the courage to fight back. The platform belongs to me, and I will deliver it to you exactly as requested." There it was, in black and white, undeniable proof of his malicious intent, his fraud, and his utter contempt for me and our user base. I didn't stop there. I kept digging into the financial records. I discovered that Julian had been using corporate funds from our initial launch to pay for his personal luxury expenses, his high-end apartment lease, his designer suits, and lavish parties, disguising them as marketing and client acquisition expenses. He was actively embezzling money from the company before the Vanguard investment had even fully cleared. I compiled everything. Every email, every bank statement, every private message, and every piece of original source code that proved my sole authorship of the platform. I organized the data into a flawless chronological narrative. But I knew that sending this data to a lawyer or a government regulatory agency would result in a quiet, drawn-out legal process that Julian could easily suppress with his PR team and expensive lawyers. He would spin the narrative, claim the documents were forged by a disgruntled ex-employee, and bury the truth. If I wanted real justice, I had to make the truth impossible to ignore. I had to reveal it completely in the open, in front of the entire world simultaneously. I had to let the public be the judge, jury, and executioner of Julian's reputation. I looked at the calendar. In 2 weeks, Julian was scheduled to be the keynote speaker at the annual Global Tech Innovation Summit. It was the biggest event of the year for the tech industry. He was going to stand on a massive stage in front of thousands of live attendees and hundreds of thousands of online viewers to officially announce the launch of Safe Haven's global expansion, backed by the Vanguard Group. It was going to be the absolute pinnacle of his career. I smiled in the darkness of my room. "Perfect," I whispered to myself. "That is the exact stage where you will fall." To ensure the exposure was completely airtight, I knew I needed to look beyond just the digital files. I needed human confirmation. I needed people who had witnessed Julian's behavior but had been too afraid to speak up. I had to become an investigator, quietly reaching out to individuals from our past who had been pushed aside by Julian's aggressive ambition. My first stop was to contact Clara, our former office manager. Clara had been one of our very first hires. She was an incredibly organized, hardworking woman who kept the daily operations running smoothly, She had always been kind to me, often bringing me coffee during my late-night coding sessions. But 3 months before I was kicked out, Clara had abruptly resigned. At the time, Julian told me she had left for a better-paying opportunity. I never had the chance to question it. I tracked Clara down to a quiet suburban coffee shop. When she saw me walk in, her eyes widened in surprise, and a flash of genuine sympathy crossed her face. "Arthur," she said, rising to give me a gentle hug. "I saw what happened on the news. I'm so sorry." I knew Julian was ambitious, but I didn't think he would go that far. "Thank you, Clara," I said, sitting across from her. "I need to ask you the truth about why you left the company. Julian told me you found a better job, but I don't think that's the whole story." Clara looked down at her hands, nervously turning her coffee cup. She hesitated for a long moment before letting out a heavy sigh. "Julian threatened me, Arthur. I discovered that he was altering the financial ledgers, moving money into a personal account. When I confronted him about it, he told me that if I breathed a word to you or anyone else, he would ensure I was blacklisted from the entire tech industry. He told me he would accuse me of theft and ruin my reputation. I was terrified, Arthur. I have a family to support. I couldn't risk it, so I just quit." My jaw tightened. The level of Julian's villainy seemed to have no floor. "Clara, I am preparing to reveal the complete truth about Julian publicly. I have the financial documents, but I need your confirmation. Will you allow me to include a signed statement from you detailing exactly why you left?" Clara looked into my eyes. She saw the absolute determination in my face. The quiet, timid Arthur she used to know was gone. "If it means stopping him from hurting anyone else, yes," she said firmly. "I will give you everything you need." With Clara's statement secured, I reached out to Marcus, a brilliant local designer whom Julian had contracted to create our early branding. Marcus had been promised a percentage of equity in the company, but after his work was delivered and approved, Julian found a loophole in his contract, refused to pay his full fee, and cut him out entirely. Marcus had tried to fight it, but he simply didn't have the financial resources to contest Julian's corporate lawyers. When I met Marcus at his studio, he was initially defensive. "What do you want, Arthur? You were his partner. You watched him rip me off." "I didn't know, Marcus," I said sincerely, looking him straight in the eye. "Julian told me you had mutually agreed to a flat fee because you wanted quick cash. He lied to me just like he lied to you. I was thrown out of the company a month ago. He stole everything from me, too." Marcus's expression softened, replaced by a look of shock. "He threw you out? The guy who actually built the platform?" "Yes," I replied, "but I'm not letting him get away with it. I am building a public case against him, and I need your story. I want to show the world that this wasn't an isolated incident. It is a systematic pattern of behavior." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. "Count me in. Tell me what you need me to do." Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together beautifully. I had the digital evidence, the financial records, the original source code repository with time-stamped logs proving my development history, and now the sworn testimonies of the people Julian had stepped on to climb his ladder of success. I returned to my apartment and began compiling all of this information into a beautifully designed, incredibly easy-to-read public digital dossier. I also recorded a calm, measured, and deeply emotional video statement of myself. In the video, I didn't scream or shout. I simply told the story from the beginning. I spoke about my passion for helping creators, my mistake of trusting Julian, and the absolute betrayal that followed. I held up the evidence, showing the emails where Julian explicitly planned to sell out the user base and manipulate the investors. I named the dossier, "The Illusion of Innovation," the true story of Julian and Safe Haven. I programmed a script that would host this dossier across dozens of decentralized mirror servers across the web simultaneously. Once I hit the launch button, it would be physically impossible for Julian's lawyers to take it down. It would spread across the internet like wildfire. Everything was set. The trap was laid, and it was completely inescapable. Julian was moving forward with his grand presentation, completely oblivious to the fact that he was marching toward his own public execution. He truly believed I was staying quiet, nursing my wounds in obscurity. He had no idea that my silence was the fuse, and it was about to reach the dynamite. The day of the Global Tech Innovation Summit had finally arrived. The city was bustling with thousands of tech executives, journalists, investors, and enthusiasts from all over the world. The Grand Convention Center was adorned with massive, towering digital billboards. Julian's face was plastered across almost all of them, accompanied by the bold tagline, "The Future of Ethical Creation." Keynote by Julian, founder of Safehaven. I arrived at the convention center early, blending seamlessly into the massive crowd. I wore a simple hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low over my eyes. Nobody recognized me, and that was exactly what I wanted. I walked through the grand exhibition hall, watching people gather around the Safehaven booth, listening to corporate representatives pitch the platform using the exact slogans and values that I had conceptualized in my small apartment a year ago. It felt surreal, but I remained completely calm. My emotions were entirely under lock and key. At 7 p.m., the main auditorium doors opened. The room was massive, designed to hold over 5,000 people. Within 15 minutes, every single seat was filled, and the standing areas at the back were packed to maximum capacity. A massive, cinematic screen spanned the entire width of the main stage, glowing with the ambient branding of the summit. I found a spot near the back, standing close to one of the main technical control booths. I had already used my hidden access to connect to the venue's internal media network earlier that afternoon. My program was sitting quietly in the event's local server, waiting for my final trigger command from my phone. The lights in the auditorium began to dim, and the crowd fell into an expectant silence. The announcer's voice boomed through the massive speaker system. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the keynote presentation of the Global Tech Innovation Summit. Tonight, we look at the future of creator independence. Please welcome the visionary mastermind behind Safehaven, Julian." The crowd erupted into thunderous applause as upbeat, energetic music blasted through the speakers. Dramatic strobe lights swept across the room. Julian walked out from the wings of the stage, exuding absolute confidence. He smiled broadly, waving to the crowd, soaking in every single bit of the adoration. He looked immaculate in his designer suit, the perfect embodiment of a modern, successful tech tycoon. He walked to the center of the stage, stood behind the sleek podium, and waited for the applause to die down. When the room grew quiet, he adjusted his microphone and began to speak with that flawless, mesmerizing charisma. "Thank you, everyone," Julian began, his voice warm and resonant. "Innovation is not just about technology. It's about trust. When I first envisioned Safehaven, I looked at a world where independent creators were constantly being exploited, where their hard work was stolen, and where they had no voice. I built Safehaven to be a sanctuary for those creators. I wanted to build a platform where integrity matters more than profit." Standing in the dark at the back of the room, I listened to him speak those words. The sheer hypocrisy of his speech was breathtaking. He was standing on a stage built on theft, preaching about integrity to thousands of people. I felt a slight tremor in my hand, not out of fear, but from the sheer anticipation of what was about to happen. Julian continued his presentation, showing beautiful slides of the platform's growth metrics and user success stories. The audience was completely captivated. Investors from the Vanguard Group were sitting in the front row, smiling proudly, nodding in approval. Julian had them completely in the palm of his hand. "And tonight," Julian said, his voice rising to a dramatic crescendo, "I am incredibly proud to announce that Safehaven is entering its next chapter. Backed by a historic partnership with the Vanguard Group, we are expanding globally. We are bringing our ethical sanctuary to millions of creators worldwide. Let's take a look at the future we are building together." Julian turned around, gesturing grandly to the massive screen behind him, expecting the promotional launch video to begin playing. This was my cue. I pulled out my phone, unlocked the screen, and looked at the single red button on my custom interface. It was labeled, "Reveal." I took a deep breath, thinking about the sleepless nights, the humiliation in the hallway, the tears of my mother when she saw me broken, and the artist Julian was planning to exploit. "Time to tell the truth, Julian," I murmured quietly. I pressed the button. The massive screen behind Julian didn't play the glossy, high-production promotional video his marketing team had prepared. Instead, the screen suddenly went completely pitch black. The energetic background music abruptly cut out, replaced by a loud, piercing audio pop that echoed through the massive auditorium. Julian froze. He turned around to look at the black screen, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he quickly recovered his composure. He turned back to the audience, letting out a nervous, charming chuckle. "Well, it looks like our technical team is experiencing a little glitch," Julian said smoothly into his microphone. "That's the beauty of live tech events, right?" The crowd chuckled lightly, expecting the issue to be resolved within seconds. But the screen didn't stay black. Suddenly, large, blood-red text flashed onto the screen, filling the entire auditorium with an ominous, bright glow. The text read, "The Safe Haven Project. The illusion of innovation." A murmur swept through the 5,000 people in the audience. The investors in the front row leaned forward, their brows furrowing in deep confusion. Julian's face paled slightly, his eyes widening as he stared at the words. "What is this?" Julian whispered, his voice picking up on the live microphone. He turned to the tech booth, waving his hands frantically. "Cut the feed. Turn it off." But the technical staff in the booth had completely lost control of the system. My program had completely locked down the master console. Before anyone could react, my recorded video began to play on the massive screen. My face appeared, towering over the stage, looking calm, steady, and resolute. The audio system blared my voice across the entire convention center with perfect clarity. "My name is Arthur," my recorded self began, speaking to the crowd, "and I am the sole creator and developer of Safe Haven. The man standing on this stage tonight, Julian, is not a visionary founder. He is a thief who stole this platform through legal fraud, and he is preparing to sell out every single user who trusts him." The auditorium erupted into absolute chaos. People stood up from their seats, gasping in shock. Journalists immediately pulled out their phones and cameras, training their lenses directly on Julian, whose face had now turned completely white. He was standing frozen in the spotlight, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck. "Don't take my word for it," my voice continued from the screen. "Let's look at the evidence." The video transitioned into a flawlessly organized presentation of the internal documents. The screen displayed the private emails between Julian and the Vanguard Group. The specific text was magnified for everyone to see clearly. "Don't worry about Arthur. He is a weak, quiet guy who does what he's told. He doesn't have the courage to fight back. The platform belongs to me." The crowd let out a collective gasp of disapproval. The hypocrisy was laid bare in front of thousands of people. Then came the emails detailing the plan to dismantle the creator protection protocols and exploit user data for profit. "Turn it off. Shut the power down," Julian screamed on stage, completely losing his cool, his polished persona shattering into a million pieces. He ran toward the side of the stage, yelling at the event staff, but they were completely mesmerized by the screen, unable or unwilling to intervene. The presentation continued relentlessly. It displayed Julian's personal bank statements, showing how he had embezzled corporate funds for luxury items. Then, Clara's recorded face appeared on the screen, detailing how Julian had threatened and intimidated her into silence. Marcus's face followed, exposing how he had been cheated out of his branding equity. The evidence was overwhelming, comprehensive, and absolutely undeniable. It was a complete public destruction of Julian's character, executed on the exact stage he had chosen for his greatest triumph. I stood at the back of the room, watching the scene unfold. I saw Julian running back to the podium, trying to speak into the microphone to defend himself, but the system had automatically cut his audio feed. He was screaming into a dead microphone, his gestures wild and frantic, looking completely unhinged. The Vanguard Group investors in the front row stood up simultaneously. Their expressions were filled with pure fury and disgust. They didn't even look at Julian as they turned their backs to the stage and marched out of the auditorium, surrounded by a swarm of rushing reporters. The $2 million deal was dead, vaporized in a single moment. The audience was in a total frenzy. People were shouting, recording, and uploading the live feed to social media. Within minutes, the hashtag of the summit and Julian's name were trending #1 worldwide. The mirror servers I had set up were receiving millions of hits per second as the entire global tech community accessed the complete dossier. Julian looked out at the crowd, realizing that his career, his reputation, his wealth, and his future had just vanished into thin air. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a stage monitor, and fled into the wings, completely broken and humiliated. I watched him disappear from the stage. I took a deep, clean breath. For the first time in 3 years, the heavy weight on my chest was completely gone. The silence that had once been my prison had become my greatest weapon, and justice had finally been served. The fallout from that night was swift, devastating, and absolute. The tech industry had never witnessed a public exposure of that magnitude. It became known in the media as the keynote reckoning. The morning after the summit, the board of directors for the corporate entity of Safe Haven held an emergency meeting. With the Vanguard Group officially pulling out of the deal and the platform's user base threatening a massive, immediate boycott, the board had no choice but to take drastic action to save the company from complete collapse. They voted unanimously to terminate Julian from his position as Chief Executive Officer effective immediately, stripping him of all authority and benefits. But Julian's problems were just beginning. The financial embezzlement documents I had exposed caught the immediate attention of federal regulatory authorities. A formal investigation was launched into his financial practices. Within a week, Julian was officially charged with corporate fraud and grand larceny. His personal bank accounts were frozen, his luxury assets were seized, and he went from living in a penthouse apartment to facing a potential multi-year prison sentence. He was completely destroyed. The man who had walked onto that stage with arrogant confidence was now a social pariah, completely abandoned by his wealthy friends, his investors, and everyone who had once praised him. A month after the exposure, I received an unexpected phone call from the company's remaining legal representatives. They invited me to a meeting at the very office building from which I had been so cruelly evicted. When I arrived, there were no security guards blocking my path. Instead, the staff members standing in the hallway looked at me with immense respect, some even clapping softly as I walked past. I was escorted into the main boardroom, where the remaining board members and investors were waiting. The chairman of the board stood up and extended his hand to me. "Arthur, we want to apologize for what happened to you. We were completely blinded by Julian's deception. The truth is out now, and we know that without you, this platform has no future. The users want you back. The community trusts you. We want to offer you the position of sole Chief Executive Officer, along with full restoration of your 50% equity and complete creative control of the platform." I looked at his outstretched hand. I thought about how much I had fought to get to this point. I didn't feel a sense of arrogant pride. I simply felt a profound sense of peace. "I accept," I said, shaking his hand. "But under one condition, we rewrite the corporate charter today. Safe Haven will always remain an ethical sanctuary for creators. We will never sell out our user data, and we will never put profit above people." "Agreed," the chairman replied without a single moment of hesitation. Over the next year, we rebuilt the company from the ground up, keeping that promise at the core of everything we did. The Safe Haven project grew larger and more successful than it had ever been under Julian. But this time, its success was built on honesty, transparency, and genuine community support. I was no longer just the guy hiding behind a screen. I was a leader who had proven he had the courage to protect his creation. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I saw a man walking down the street outside our building. He was wearing old, worn-out clothes, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the pavement. It was Julian. He looked thin, tired, and completely broken. He was waiting for a public bus, holding a small folder of legal documents. He happened to look up and caught my eye. For a brief moment, we stood there, locking eyes across the busy city street. There was no anger in my gaze, no smug satisfaction. There was only a quiet, calm understanding. Julian looked away quickly, his face flush with shame, and stepped onto the bus, disappearing into the city traffic. I walked to my car, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the journey I had been through. My mother's old warning echoed in my mind, but I finally understood the true lesson of my experience. Being a quiet, gentle person does not mean you have to be a victim. True strength does not lie in being the loudest voice in the room, nor does it lie in manipulation or aggressive ambition. True strength is found in patience, in integrity, and in the unwavering commitment to the truth. There is an old saying that the truth will always find its way to the light, no matter how deeply it is buried. Sometimes, it just takes a quiet person who refuses to stay silent any longer to dig it up and show it to the world. And when that happens, no amount of power, wealth, or deception can ever stand against it.